That's a recreational vehicle, not a permanent fixture, Mr. Miller. Your driveway is not a campground, and this is a covenanted community with standards. The voice dripped with a kind of saccharine condescension that only a true master of petty tyranny can produce. I turned from the empty, oil-stained patch of concrete where my brand-new 40-foot Tiffin Allegro bus had been parked less than an hour ago and faced the source of the sound. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association, stood on my lawn, her arms crossed over a voluminous chest encased in a flamingo-pink tracksuit. Her face, a mask of smug satisfaction, was framed by a helmet of peroxide-blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms fire. She held a clipboard like a scepter, the very symbol of her dominion over mismatched lawn gnomes and insufficiently beige mailboxes. My heart was a cold, hard knot in my chest, a feeling I hadn't had since a dusty road outside Fallujah. The RV wasn't just a vehicle, it was the culmination of a 30-year career in the Marine Corps, a promise my wife, Sarah, and I had made to ourselves through countless deployments and lonely nights. It was our rolling monument to freedom, purchased with discipline and sacrifice, and this woman, this suburban despot, had just had it vanished from my own property while I was inside making a cup of coffee. "You had my property towed from my driveway, Karen?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, a tone my junior Marines had learned to fear more than any shouting. She smiled, a tight, unpleasant stretching of her lips. "As per Section 7, subsection B of the Oak Meadows bylaws, which you received upon closing," she recited, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard, "all vehicles classified as recreational, commercial, or otherwise non-standard must be stored in an approved enclosed facility, not in plain sight. It lowers property values." She made a little tsk-tsk sound, a theatrical display of disappointment that made my teeth ache. "We can't have the neighborhood starting to look like a transient camp, can we? I'm sure you understand. Now the fee for the violation is $300, plus the cost of the tow and daily storage. I'd pay it quickly if I were you. Those yard fees add up." She turned to leave, her victory lap complete, leaving me standing in the ruin of my morning, the ghost of my retirement dreams shimmering in the empty air. The sheer audacity, the unadulterated entitlement, it was breathtaking. She hadn't just towed a vehicle, she had stolen a piece of my life and was now charging me for the privilege. This was the moment the war began. For 30 years I fought for my country. Now I was going to have to fight for my driveway. If you've ever had your own HOA nightmare, you know exactly the kind of slow-burning rage I'm talking about. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, and in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and share the craziest HOA story you've got. You are not alone in this fight. Now back to how I started planning my counter-offensive against the tyrant of Oak Meadows. The first thing a good gunny does when faced with a superior force is recon. I didn't get angry, not outwardly. I let the cold, focused calm settle over me. Anger is a fire that consumes your resources. I preferred the ice, the clear, sharp precision of a well-laid plan. I nodded slowly at Karen's retreating, waddling form. "I see," I said, just loud enough for her to hear. She gave a little wave without looking back. My wife, Sarah, appeared at the door, her face pale, a dish towel clutched in her hand. "Jack, what happened? Where's the Wandering Star?" she asked, her voice trembling. We'd named it the Wandering Star, a nod to the long nights I'd spent staring at constellations from forgotten corners of the world, dreaming of the day we could wander under them together. Seeing the pain in her eyes was like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a rule, it was about the callous disregard for what that RV represented. I walked over and put my arm around her. "It's okay, honey. We've got a little situation with the Homeowners Association. A misunderstanding. I'm going to handle it." The word handle felt wholly inadequate, but it was the only one I could offer. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war. That afternoon, I didn't call the tow company. I didn't call Karen to scream at her. I went to my office, a small spare room where my medals and commendations were neatly displayed in a shadow box on the wall. They weren't there for vanity. They were reminders of complex problems solved under extreme duress. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. At the top, I wrote, Operation Wandering Star. The first phase was intelligence gathering. I needed the enemy's playbook. I retrieved the mountain of paperwork we'd received when we bought the house a year ago. Buried deep within the pile was the HOA covenant, a document as thick as a small-town phone book and written in the most arcane legalese imaginable. For the next 5 hours, I read. I read every line, every clause, every addendum. I highlighted, I cross-referenced, and I made notes. I was looking for Section 7, subsection B. I found it, and just as Karen had said, it prohibited the open parking of recreational vehicles. But I also found something else, something far more interesting. I found Section 2, which defined the boundaries and jurisdiction of the Oak Meadows HOA, complete with a reference to the official plat map filed with the county clerk's office. A tiny electric thrill went through me. In the military, you learn that battles are won and lost on maps. The next morning, I wasn't at the HOA office. I was at the county records department. I spent 2 hours with a very helpful, very bored county clerk who showed me how to access the digital archives of property plat maps. I found the one for Oak Meadows filed in 1988. I zoomed in on my lot. Lot 114. My heart started beating a little faster. The digital map was overlaid with survey lines, easements, and, most importantly, the clearly delineated boundary of the Homeowners Association's jurisdiction. And there it was, a thin, dotted line that cut right across the top third of my property. My house, my lawn, my flower beds, they were all squarely within the HOA's domain. But my driveway from about 10 feet past the garage door all the way to the street was not. According to the official, legally binding document that created the Oak Meadows HOA, the front portion of my property, including the exact spot where my RV had been parked, was outside its legal reach. The developer had apparently ceded the first 30 feet of the front lots to the county as a utility and access easement, a common practice. But for whatever reason, they had drawn the HOA boundary line behind that easement. Karen hadn't just overstepped her authority. She had operated in territory where she had no authority at all. She hadn't enforced a covenant. She had committed theft of a $400,000 vehicle from private property that was, for all legal intents and purposes, not her concern. I paid the $20 fee for 3 certified sealed copies of the plat map. As I walked out of the county building and into the bright sunlight, I felt the first real smile of the day spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who has just found fresh tracks. The bureaucratic wall Karen had built around herself was about to have a very large, very well-documented hole blown straight through it. I now had the map. Next, I needed to understand the terrain and the disposition of the locals. I needed to talk to my neighbors. I knew this wasn't just about me. Tyrants like Karen don't operate in a vacuum. They thrive on the silence and fear of the people they rule. Her overreach with me was likely not an isolated incident, but the crescendo of a long and storied career in petty despotism. My first stop was directly across the street. Mr. Henderson was a retired accountant in his late 70s, a quiet man who spent most of his days meticulously tending to his garden. I'd always just waved. Today I walked over. He was on his knees, weeding a bed of immaculate petunias when I approached. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," I said. He looked up, his eyes wary behind his thick glasses. In a neighborhood ruled by an HOA, every interaction holds the potential for a violation notice. "Mr. Miller," he acknowledged, slowly getting to his feet and wiping his dirt-stained hands on his trousers. "Saw the commotion yesterday. Your big bus is gone." I nodded. The HOA president Karen had it towed. Mr. Henderson's face went blank for a moment, and then a flicker of something, anger maybe, or just weary resignation, passed through his eyes. He glanced nervously toward Karen's house 2 doors down as if she could hear us. "Ah," he said, the single syllable loaded with meaning. "She's a stickler for the rules, that one." "The thing is, Mr. Henderson," I said, lowering my voice slightly, "I'm not so sure she was following the rules. I've been doing some research." I watched him, gauging his reaction. He didn't respond, just looked at his petunias. So I took a chance. "She fined you last month, didn't she? For the color of your garden hose." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. "How did you—" I was on my porch and I said, I saw her leave the notice on your door. Watched you read it. You looked upset. He sighed, a long, tired sound, and the dam of his reserve finally broke. Lime green, he said, his voice a disbelieving whisper. She said it wasn't an earth tone and disrupted the neighborhood's visual harmony. It was a $25 fine. It wasn't about the money, you understand. It was the principle. My wife bought me that hose for my birthday. She loved the bright color. His wife had passed away 2 years prior. The hose was one of the last gifts she'd given him. Did you fight it? I asked. He shook his head. What's the point? She's the president. She and the board. They just approve each other's decisions. You fight, you get more fines, lawyer letters. It's easier to just pay. Just keep your head down. He looked at me, a glimmer of hope warring with years of learned helplessness. You're really going to fight her on this RV thing, aren't you? I gave him a firm nod. I am. I spent the rest of the day walking the neighborhood. The stories poured out, a litany of petty abuses and financial penalties. A young family, the Garcias, had been fined $200 because their children's plastic slide was visible over the top of their 6-foot privacy fence. A woman named Mrs. Gable was cited because her wind chimes were deemed acoustically intrusive. And then I met Dave. Dave was a former Army captain, about 15 years my junior, who had done 2 tours in Afghanistan. He was out in his driveway, trying to fix a lawnmower, cussing a blue streak. I introduced myself, and when he found out I was a retired gunny, his whole demeanor changed. We were brothers in a tribe that extended far beyond this manicured suburban battlefield. The HOA? He scoffed when I told him why I was there. Let me tell you about Karen. A year ago, he had installed a top-of-the-line basketball hoop for his 2 sons. It was a sturdy, professional-grade unit cemented into the ground at the edge of his driveway. 3 days after it was installed, the first notice arrived. It was an unapproved permanent structure. He was ordered to remove it. Dave, being a reasonable guy, went to the next HOA meeting to plead his case. He pointed out that half a dozen other homes had similar hoops. Karen informed him that those had been grandfathered in before the new aesthetic standards were adopted. Standards she had pushed through the previous year. He was fined $500. When he refused to pay or remove the hoop, the fines began to escalate daily. Then came the letter from the HOA's lawyer threatening a lien on his property. With a baby on the way and his wife worried sick, Dave had caved. He'd paid a contractor $500 to dig up and haul away the hoop, and another $2,000 in accumulated fines and legal fees. She broke me, man, Dave said, his voice thick with a shame I knew all too well. The shame of a warrior forced to retreat in a battle he should have won. I had to choose between fighting for a basketball hoop and protecting my family's home. It wasn't a choice. He looked over at my empty driveway. She towed your rig? From your own property? She did, I said. I then unrolled one of the certified plat maps on the hood of his car. I pointed to the dotted line. But she made a mistake, a big one. She stepped outside her jurisdiction. Dave stared at the map, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was the look of a soldier who's just been handed a new weapon. Holy cow, he breathed. You've got her. You've actually got her. We might have her, I corrected. She's been able to do this because everyone fights her alone. She can't fight the whole neighborhood. The ice in my veins was beginning to melt, replaced by the warmth of a forming alliance. The recon phase was over. It was time to go on the offensive. The next step was to formalize the attack, to turn my growing pile of evidence into a weapon that the system couldn't ignore. This meant paperwork, the lifeblood of any bureaucracy, and the very thing Karen used to terrorize the residents of Oak Meadows. I was about to turn her own weapon against her. Using the state statutes governing homeowners associations, which I had printed out and placed in the front of my Operation Wandering Star binder, I drafted a formal records request. It wasn't a friendly email. It was a legally structured demand sent via certified mail with return receipt requested, a method that creates a paper trail she couldn't deny receiving. I requested unredacted copies of the last 5 years of all HOA meeting minutes, full annual budgets and expense reports, and any and all correspondence related to the towing of my vehicle. I cited the specific state law that required her to produce these documents within 14 business days. I also included a crisp, clear copy of the certified county plat map, with my property in the HOA boundary highlighted in bright yellow, accompanied by a simple, one-sentence question. Please provide the basis of the HOA's authority to remove property from a parcel outside of its legal jurisdiction as defined by the enclosed official plat map. I sent a second, nearly identical letter to the tow company, Reliable Recovery, demanding a copy of the tow order Karen had signed and informing them that they were currently in possession of stolen property, a felony in our state known as conversion. I mentioned that my property was valued at over $400,000, a number I was sure would get their attention. Then I waited. The 14 business days were a test of patience, a strategic pause. It gave Karen time to receive the letters, to realize this wasn't just some angry homeowner blowing off steam, and to make her next move. I used the time to consolidate my support. I created a private email group for the neighbors who had shared their stories with me. Mr. Henderson, the Garcias, Mrs. Gable, Dave, and a half-dozen others. I shared my findings about the plat map and my plan of action, being careful to stick to facts, not emotions. The response was immediate and electric. People who had been isolated and intimidated for years suddenly felt a surge of collective power. Dave, with his military background, immediately volunteered to help organize. "We need to canvass the entire neighborhood, Gunny," he said on the phone. "Get proxy votes. If it comes to a recall, we need to have the numbers locked down before she even knows what's happening." I agreed. The battle would be fought on two fronts: the legal one, which I was spearheading, and the political one, which would be our ultimate checkmate. On the 10th business day, a thick envelope arrived from the HOA's law firm. It wasn't the documents I had requested. It was a cease and desist letter. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, full of jargon and veiled threats. It accused me of a campaign of harassment against the HOA president, stated that the plat map was irrelevant to the enforcement of community-wide aesthetic standards, and demanded I immediately halt my subversive organizing of other residents. The letter claimed my RV, regardless of its precise location, constituted a visual nuisance affecting the entire community, and as such, fell under the HOA's broad powers to protect property values. Best of all, it included an invoice for $850, the law firm's fee for drafting the letter, which they had generously added to my HOA account. They were trying to make me pay for the bullets they were firing at me. I laughed out loud. This was better than I could have hoped for. This letter was her first major mistake. It was an admission in writing that she was refusing a legal request for records, and it was an attempt to intimidate me using the HOA's funds. I scanned it and immediately emailed it to my new group of allies with the subject line, "She's taking the bait." The fear that had held the neighborhood in its grip for so long was beginning to curdle into anger. 2 days later, I got a call from a man named Stan, the owner of Reliable Recovery. His voice was laced with panic. "Mr. Miller, Stan Krolikowski, look, I got your letter, and I got the one from my lawyer. We need to talk." "I agree," I said calmly. "My $400,000 RV is still on your lot. Accruing fees I have no intention of paying." "About that," he said quickly, "there's been a major misunderstanding. The work order we received from the HOA president, it wasn't entirely clear on the property lines. My driver just hooked it up where he was told. We're just a service provider, you know?" I could hear the desperation in his voice. His lawyer had probably explained that being a service provider in the theft of a $500,000 asset was not a great legal defense. "Listen," Stan pleaded, "I can't get in the middle of a fight between you and your HOA. But I also can't have my business implicated in a grand theft auto charge. What do I have to do to make this right?" The second piece of the puzzle was clicking into place. "You're going to waive every single dollar of towing and storage fees," I said. "And you're going to provide me with a sworn affidavit detailing the exact instructions you received from Karen, including a copy of the work order she signed. In return, I will consider your company's involvement in this matter concluded." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "Affidavit and a copy of the work order. You'll have it by the end of the day." Karen had outsourced her dirty work, and her contractor was now officially my star witness. The bureaucratic wall was not just breached, it was crumbling, and the pieces were falling exactly where I wanted them. The binder on my desk was getting thick. It now contained the certified plat map, the ignored records request, the threatening letter from her lawyer, and now a sworn statement from the man who had physically taken my property on her orders. It was a beautiful, methodical, and damning collection of her own arrogance. It was time to find a lawyer of my own. I didn't want some high-priced corporate attorney. I needed someone who understood the mission. Someone who saw this not just as a civil dispute, but as a fight for justice. Dave knew a guy. He runs a nonprofit, Dave explained. Vets for Justice. They provide pro bono or low-cost legal services for veterans who are getting screwed over by predatory lenders, employers, and yes, HOAs. His name is Ben Carter. He's a former JAG officer. He eats guys like Karen's lawyer for breakfast. That sounded like my kind of guy. I made an appointment. The Vets for Justice office was in a modest building downtown, a world away from the polished mahogany and panoramic views of the HOA's law firm. Ben Carter was a man in his late 40s with a sharp suit, a sharper haircut, and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to my story without interruption, occasionally nodding as I laid out my documents on his conference table in chronological order. The plat map, the covenant, the photos of my empty driveway, the letters, the affidavit from the tow company. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Gunny," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "this is the most beautiful case of HOA overreach I've seen in 5 years. It's a work of art." He picked up the threatening letter from Karen's lawyer. "This is a gift." He's put her refusal to comply with state open records laws in writing. And this part about the plat map being irrelevant, a judge is going to have a field day with that. He explained the legal angles. We had a clear case for conversion, the civil equivalent of theft. We had a claim for damages, including the loss of use of the vehicle and emotional distress. And most importantly, we had a slam dunk case for a declaratory judgment from a court stating that the HOA had no jurisdiction over that portion of my property, which would invalidate not just the towing, but any future attempt to regulate it. "But we're not going to file a lawsuit just yet," Ben said, his eyes gleaming. "That's what she expects. We're going to give her one last chance to walk away. It's a critical step. We need to show the court that we made every reasonable effort to resolve this before escalating." He drafted a new letter on his firm's letterhead. It was polite, professional, and absolutely brutal. It laid out our entire case, referencing the plat map, the tow company's affidavit, and the state laws Karen had broken. It demanded the immediate return of my RV at the HOA's expense, full reimbursement for any damage incurred during the tow and impoundment, a public, written apology to me and my wife, and a full and immediate dismissal of all fines and legal fees. It gave her a deadline of 72 hours to comply. If she has a single competent bone in her body, she'll take the deal, Ben said as he sealed the envelope. "She'll cut her losses, return your vehicle, and this will be over." "And if she doesn't?" I asked. Ben's smile widened. "Then we proceed to the next phase. And trust me, it's going to be a lot more public and a lot more painful for her." We sent the letter via courier with a signature required directly to Karen's home address. The 72 hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. I updated the neighborhood email group. The tension was palpable. Everyone was watching, waiting. On the final day, just before the 5 o'clock deadline, an email arrived. It was from Karen's lawyer. It was short and dismissive. "My client, the Oak Meadows HOA, rejects your baseless demands in their entirety. Any further communication on this matter should be directed to my office. Furthermore, please be advised that the HOA is now exploring its own legal remedies against Mr. Miller for tortious interference with its business operations. Govern yourself accordingly." I forwarded the email to Ben. His reply was a single sentence. "I was hoping she'd do that." Karen had refused her final off-ramp. She had chosen to double down, to escalate. She had no idea that she wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was fighting a retired Marine gunny, a former Army captain, a JAG officer, in a neighborhood that was finally ready to stand up. She thought she was governing me. In reality, she had just governed herself right into the kill zone. The time for letters was over. It was time for action. "So, here's what we do now," Ben Carter said over the phone the next morning. "We're going to stop asking for the RV back. We're going to go get it." There was a pause. "How?" I asked. "We're not going to sue the HOA, not yet. That's a slow, grinding process. We're going to file a police report for theft of a motor vehicle, and we're going to file it against an individual, Karen." My eyebrows shot up. This was a significant escalation. "Can we do that? Isn't this a civil matter?" "Normally, yes," Ben explained, "but you have two things that change the equation. First, the affidavit from the tow company, where the owner states he was acting on her specific direct order. That makes her the principal agent. Second, the certified plat map, which proves she directed him to take your property from a location where she had zero legal authority. You're not a homeowner having a dispute with your HOA. You're a citizen reporting the theft of your $400,000 vehicle by a private citizen named Karen." It was brilliant. It bypassed the slow-moving civil courts and put the issue squarely in the hands of law enforcement. It reframed the narrative from a boring contractual dispute to a simple, powerful story. "A woman stole my truck." "Go down to the sheriff's office," Ben instructed. "Don't go to the front desk. Ask to speak to a detective in the auto theft division. Bring your binder, all of it. Lay out the facts calmly and logically. You're not a crazy, angry guy. You're a victim of a crime presenting evidence. Let me know what they say." I put on a collared shirt and my most non-threatening pair of slacks. I walked into the sheriff's office carrying my binder, which now felt as heavy and significant as a field pack. I did exactly as Ben said. The desk sergeant looked skeptical when I asked for an auto theft detective, but my calm demeanor and the mention of a Class B felony conversion got his attention. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from a detective named Mike Rourke, a burly, tired-looking man in his 50s with a coffee-stained tie. He looked at me like I was another crank wasting his time. Then I opened the binder. I started with the bill of sale for the RV, then the pictures of it in my driveway, then the picture of the empty driveway. I presented the county plat map, showing the boundary line. I showed him the HOA covenant, highlighting the section defining that boundary. I gave him the affidavit from the tow company owner, complete with the work order signed by Karen. Finally, I showed him the letters from her lawyer, proving she was aware of the situation and refusing to return the property. I didn't raise my voice. I just presented the evidence, piece by piece. Rourke read everything, his expression slowly changing from boredom to grudging interest, and then to outright astonishment. He picked up the plat map and held it next to the signed tow order. "So let me get this straight," he said, rubbing his eyes. "This woman, your HOA president, hired a tow company to go onto a piece of property she doesn't control and take your vehicle, which she is now refusing to return?" "That is correct, detective," I said. He shook his head slowly, a low whistle escaping his lips. "I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've seen some crazy HOA stuff. But this is a new one." He stood up. "Okay, Mr. Miller, this isn't a civil dispute anymore. You're right. This is theft. We're going to treat it as such. I need to make a few calls, but we're going to go get your RV." An hour later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Detective Rourke's unmarked sedan, following him to reliable recovery. He hadn't called them. He wanted to show up unannounced. When we pulled into the yard, Stan Krolikowski, the owner, came out of his office, his face turning ghost white when he saw the detective's badge. "Mr. Krolikowski," Rourke said, his voice all business, "I'm here about the Tiffin motorhome you're storing, the one belonging to Mr. Miller. We have reason to believe it's stolen property." Stan started sweating. "Detective, I gave Mr. Miller a statement. I'm cooperating. The HOA ordered the tow. You just took a vehicle you had no legal right to take." Rourke cut him off. "Right now, I'm not interested in you. I'm interested in that RV. You're going to release it to Mr. Miller immediately, with no fees and no paperwork. Or my next call is to the DA to talk about your role as an accessory to grand theft. Do we understand each other?" Stan practically tripped over himself to comply. 5 minutes later, the gates to the impound lot were open, and I was looking at my wandering star. It was dusty and had a few minor scuffs on the bumper from the tow hook, but it was there. I got in, turned the key, and the big diesel engine rumbled to life. The feeling of relief was so profound, it almost brought me to my knees. I pulled the massive vehicle out of the tow yard and onto the street. Rourke was waiting for me in his car. He motioned for me to roll down my window. "We're not done yet, Mr. Miller," he said, a grim smile on his face. "Now we go have a talk with Karen, and I'd like you to be there. Follow me." This was it, the moment from the title of this story. This was the scene I had been working towards for weeks, driving my own recovered stolen property, following a police detective to the house of the woman who stole it. The satisfaction was a deep, resonant hum, better than any metal. We drove the few miles back to Oak Meadows, me in the gargantuan RV, Detective Rourke leading the way in his sedan. The absurdity of the procession was not lost on me. It was a parade of justice, rolling slowly through the manicured streets. When we turned onto my street, heads popped out of doors. People watering their lawns stopped and stared. First, they saw the detective's car, then the jaw-dropping sight of my RV filling the entire road. I saw Mr. Henderson drop his trowel. I saw Dave step out onto his porch with a massive grin. We didn't stop at my house. We kept going, right past it, and pulled to a stop directly in front of Karen's immaculate two-story colonial. I parked the RV right on the street, its massive bulk blocking the afternoon sun from her prize-winning rose bushes. Rourke and I got out and walked up her perfectly swept flagstone path. She must have seen us coming. The door opened before we could knock. Karen stood there, dressed in a powder blue tracksuit this time. She looked at me, then at the detective, then at the behemoth of a motorhome parked in front of her house. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The smug mask of authority was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Her face, which had been a picture of smug satisfaction when she'd informed me of the towing, had completely and utterly dropped. "Ma'am," Detective Rourke said, his voice flat and official, "are you Karen Becker, president of the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association?" She swallowed hard, her eyes darting between me and the detective like a cornered animal. "Yes, what is this about?" "It's about this," Rourke said, gesturing with his thumb back towards my RV, "which you ordered removed from Mr. Miller's property 2 weeks ago. I've just recovered it from an impound lot." Karen's face flushed a blotchy, furious red. The shock was wearing off, replaced by her default setting, indignant rage. "This is a civil matter. I told him that. You have no right to be here. This is harassment. I'll be calling my lawyer," she screeched, finding her voice. Rourke didn't even blink. He let her finish her tirade, his expression unchanging. When she finally ran out of air, he spoke again, his voice dropping a notch. "No, ma'am. It became a criminal matter when you refused to return property that was not yours to take. This is a 2021 Tiffin Allegro Bus, valued at over $400,000. In this state, that's grand theft, a Class B felony. Right now, I have probable cause to arrest you." The word arrest hung in the air between them. Karen's entire body seemed to deflate. The color drained from her face. She leaned against the doorframe for support. She had wielded the threat of lawyers in liens like a club for so long, she seemed genuinely unable to process a threat that was so much more real, so much more immediate. I was just enforcing the bylaws," she whispered, her voice a pathetic squeak. "The bylaws don't give you the authority to commit felonies, ma'am," Rourke said curtly, "and they certainly don't apply to land outside your jurisdiction." He reached into his jacket. For a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to pull out handcuffs. Instead, he produced a business card and a single-folded document. "This is my card. The district attorney's office will be in contact with your lawyer. For now, you are not to have any contact with Mr. Miller or his family. Any attempt to find him, harass him, or retaliate against him in any way will be considered witness tampering, and I will be back. Do you understand?" She gave a weak, terrified nod. Rourke then handed her the other document. It was from Ben Carter's office. It was the official summons, notifying her that I was filing a civil suit against her personally, and against the HOA, for damages, legal fees, and a permanent injunction. The detective was serving her the papers for me. The sheer procedural beauty of it was stunning. Her face, which I thought couldn't get any more horrified, somehow managed it. She was being investigated for a felony and sued civilly at the exact same moment on her own doorstep, with the evidence of her crime parked 30 feet away and half the neighborhood watching from their windows. She stared at the papers in her hand as if they were venomous snakes. "Now," Rourke said, turning to me, "Mr. Miller, is there anything else?" I looked at Karen, the shrunken, terrified woman who had been a titan of tyranny just an hour before. I looked at my RV, safe and sound. I thought about the fines, the threats, the sleepless nights she had caused for so many people. "No, Detective," I said. "I think we're good for now." We walked back to our vehicles, leaving her standing in her doorway, a statue of crumbling authority. As I climbed back into the driver's seat of the Wandering Star, I caught Dave's eye across the street. He gave me a slow, respectful salute. The war wasn't over, but a major battle had just been won. The public humiliation of Karen was a massive victory, but it was tactical, not strategic. The root of the problem, her position of power, remained. While the criminal investigation and the civil suit would play out, the ultimate solution had to be political. She had to be removed. The sight of Karen being served on her own doorstep had sent a shockwave through the neighborhood. The story spread like wildfire, embellished with each telling. The email group I had started ballooned from a dozen members to over 50 in 2 days. People who had been too afraid to even speak of the HOA were now openly sharing their own horror stories. The fear was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of empowerment. Dave and I called a meeting at my house to plan the final phase, the recall. We sat around my dining room table, the certified plat map spread out like a battle plan. With us were Mr. Henderson, the Garcias, and a few other key residents who had emerged as leaders. "According to the bylaws," Dave said, tapping the thick document, "a special meeting to recall a board member can be called with a petition signed by 25% of the homeowners. We have 150 homes in this association. We need 38 signatures." "We have more than that in the email group alone," Mrs. Garcia pointed out. "Getting the signatures will be the easy part. It's winning the vote that matters. She'll fight dirty." "She will," I agreed. "She'll try to invalidate the signatures. She'll use HOA funds to send out letters full of lies. She'll try to intimidate people into not showing up for the meeting. We have to be more organized than she is." We devised a three-pronged strategy. First, the petition drive. We wouldn't just collect signatures. We would use it as an opportunity to talk to every single homeowner, to explain the situation with facts and evidence. Dave, with his natural charisma, would lead that team. Second, information warfare. Mr. Henderson, the retired accountant, volunteered to lead a small committee to scrutinize the 5 years of HOA financials, which Karen was now legally compelled to release due to our ongoing lawsuit. He had a hunch that her sloppiness with rules might extend to the budget. Third, legal preparation. I would continue to work with Ben Carter to ensure the recall process was legally airtight, anticipating and preempting any procedural tricks Karen might try to pull. The petition drive was a resounding success. In one weekend, Dave and his team secured not 38, but 94 signatures, well over half the community. Each signature was a small act of rebellion. People were signing on their doorsteps, in their driveways, openly defying the woman who had ruled them through fear. We submitted the petition, again via certified mail, to the HOA secretary, a nervous man named Jerry, who was clearly terrified of Karen, but legally obligated to accept it. As predicted, Karen's counterattack was swift and vicious. A letter printed on expensive cardstock and paid for with HOA funds was mailed to every resident. It painted me as a disgruntled troublemaker with a personal vendetta, someone who wanted to dismantle the HOA and let the neighborhood descend into chaos, with trailers on every lawn and property values plummeting. It accused me of bullying and harassing a dedicated volunteer who has given years of her life to protecting your investment. It was a masterclass in projection and fear-mongering. But it was too late. We had already inoculated the community with the truth. To counter her letter, we didn't send one of our own. We decided to do something more powerful. We hosted a neighborhood barbecue. We booked the community park pavilion for a Saturday afternoon, sending out a simple invitation. Come meet your neighbors. Free hot dogs and hamburgers. We'll also have a brief factual update on recent HOA matters. Nearly 200 people showed up. It felt less like a cookout and more like a town hall meeting. After everyone had eaten, I stood up with a small portable speaker. I didn't shout or grandstand. I calmly and methodically laid out the facts. I had enlarged the county plat map onto a huge poster board and put it on an easel. I showed them the dotted line. This isn't about my RV, I told the crowd. It's about this line. It's about an HOA president who either didn't know the legal limits of her power or chose to ignore them. If she can do this to me, on a piece of land she doesn't even control, what can she do to you? Then Mr. Henderson got up. He had spent a week poring over the financials and what he found was damning. He presented his findings on another poster board, a simple spreadsheet that showed years of questionable expenses, thousands of dollars for landscaping consultations with a company that was owned by Karen's brother-in-law, exorbitant legal fees that corresponded not with any real threats to the HOA, but with every time a resident had tried to question her authority. He showed them the invoice for the threatening letter her lawyer had sent me, proof that she was using their money to intimidate her neighbors. The crowd was silent. Then a low murmur of anger began to build. When Mr. Henderson was finished, Dave stood up. "The bylaws give us the power to fix this," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We have submitted a petition to recall Karen as president and as a board member. The special meeting will be held in 2 weeks. She will tell you this is about one man's RV. But look around. This is about all of us. This is about taking back our community." The barbecue had turned the tide. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a movement. The special meeting was set for a Tuesday night in the rented conference room of a nearby hotel. The air was thick with tension. The room, designed to hold 100 people, was overflowing. More than 120 homeowners had packed into the space, lining the walls and spilling out into the hallway. This was an unprecedented turnout. Karen and the 2 other board members, her loyal cronies, sat at a table at the front of the room. She was wearing a severe black pantsuit, a desperate attempt to project an authority she no longer possessed. She looked pale and drawn. The criminal investigation and the civil suit were clearly taking their toll. She banged a gavel to start the meeting, her movements jerky and uncertain. "The first order of business," she began, her voice straining to sound official, "is to address the petition for a recall vote. Our legal counsel has advised us that there are numerous procedural irregularities with the signatures, and therefore—" Before she could finish, Ben Carter, my lawyer, who was standing quietly in the back, stepped forward. "Excuse me, Madam President," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily through the room. "My name is Ben Carter. I am legal counsel for Mr. Miller and am here as an observer on behalf of a significant number of homeowners. Could you please specify which state statute allows the board to unilaterally invalidate a petition that has met the threshold for signatures outlined in your own bylaws?" Karen stared at him, speechless. Her lawyer, a smarmy-looking man in a shiny suit, leaned over and whispered frantically in her ear. She flushed, then stammered, "Well, we have the right to review." "You have the right to verify that the signatories are homeowners in good standing," Ben cut in smoothly. "A process that my clients have already completed. The petition is valid. I would advise you to proceed with the vote as required by law, lest the HOA incur yet another, and this time entirely avoidable, legal action." Checkmate. Karen, defeated, had no choice but to proceed. According to the bylaws, the person being recalled was allowed to speak first. She stood up and launched into a rambling, self-pitying speech about her years of thankless service, about the sacrifices she had made, about how she had only ever acted to protect their property values. She painted herself as the victim, a martyr being crucified by a few ungrateful malcontents, led by a man who wanted to turn their beautiful neighborhood into a trailer park. The speech fell flat. The crowd listened in stony silence. When she finished, it was my turn. I walked to the front of the room carrying my binder. I didn't use the podium. I stood directly in front of the residents. "My name is Jack Miller," I began. "I'm a retired Marine, a husband, and your neighbor. I'm not going to talk about my RV. You all know that story. I'm going to talk about what this is really about. Respect. Respect for the law, respect for our property, and respect for each other." I opened the binder. "This is the official plat map of our neighborhood. It shows where the HOA's authority ends. This is the affidavit from the tow truck driver, stating he acted on Karen's direct orders. These are the HOA's own financials, showing our money being spent on lawyers to threaten us. These aren't opinions. These are facts. I looked from face to face around the room, meeting their eyes. The question tonight is simple. Who do you want in charge of our community? Someone who respects the rules, or someone who believes the rules don't apply to them? Someone who sees their role as service, or someone who sees it as power? Someone who brings neighbors together, or someone who finds them for the color of their garden hose? A small ripple of laughter went through the room and Mr. Henderson beamed. This is your community, I concluded. It's your money. It's your choice. The vote was conducted by paper ballot, collected and counted by a neutral third party, a volunteer from a neighboring HOA whom Ben had arranged. As the ballots were being counted, Karen sat at the table, staring straight ahead, her face a frozen mask. The results were announced. The vote to recall Karen from the board of directors, 112 in favor, 8 against. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't just cheers, it was a collective, cathartic release of years of pent-up frustration. Karen didn't say a word. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and, without looking at anyone, walked out of the room. The tyrant had been deposed. In the same meeting, we held a vote for her replacement. Dave was elected to the board with a unanimous vote, and Mr. Henderson was nominated and elected as the new HOA president. The first motion the new board passed was to review and abolish the most ridiculous and punitive rules in the covenant. The second was to fire the HOA's law firm. My civil suit was settled quickly after that. The new board, on the advice of a new, much more reasonable lawyer, agreed to have the HOA's insurance pay for the minor damages to my RV, cover all of my legal fees, and issue a formal, public apology to my family and the community at large. The criminal charges against Karen were eventually dropped in exchange for her pleading to a lesser misdemeanor, paying a hefty fine, and agreeing to never again serve on any board or position of authority in any community association. A few months later, her house went up for sale. The Wandering Star was finally ready for its maiden voyage. The morning we left, the sun was bright, the air was crisp, and the neighborhood felt different. Lighter. As Sarah and I pulled the RV out of the driveway, the same driveway where this whole saga began, our neighbors came out of their houses to see us off. Mr. Henderson gave us a thumbs up from his garden, his lime green hose coiled proudly by his side. The Garcia kids waved from their lawn, their plastic slide now a permanent and celebrated fixture. Dave came over and shook my hand. "Send us a postcard, Gunny," he said with a grin. "You earned it." We pulled out onto the main road, leaving Oak Meadows in the rearview mirror. We were finally on our way to see the country we had both, in our own ways, spent our lives serving. We were free. The battle for the driveway was over, but the victory felt much, much bigger than that. It was a reminder that no tyrant, big or small, can stand against a community united, armed with the truth and unwilling to back down. And that's a lesson worth fighting for.